Becca and others who have been suffering from these chronic conditions and encouraging them to look into this if they're the right candidate. So Jim is pretty much a one-of-a-kind therapist in the physical therapy space that is really enlightened to this. Another individual on the panel is Rebecca Tolin. She's a life coach and now a mind-body chronic pain fatigue coach in the same way. And what we all have in common, again, is we all started by learning about Dr. Sarno and making tremendous progress where everything else seemed to fail us. And so just to level set, because I can't really judge at this point where people are of their knowledge of Dr. John Sarno, and then we're going to build upon that for this call. But Dr. John Sarno was a lot like us. He was a physician, and he saw that his training was not working on patients. So this started all the way back in the 50s and 60s. He was already starting to see chronic back pain then. And he's like, what we're doing is not working. We're coming out with more and more therapies in this kind of space where we believe it's the spine is the problem. And we're applying all these therapies, but these patients are very inconsistent on their progress. And in fact, the back pain issue is getting worse. What is going on? So what he did was he stepped back kind of in a move that was pretty courageous and started to talk to specialists across medical disciplines. Looking at the science, is it really the spine that's the problem? And he discovered completely something unique that flips the paradigm on its head. And it really started to confirm, I think, what we all recognize, but really nailed it so the therapy would actually work. And it's actually the brain that is behind a lot of the chronic things, right? We want to not confuse this with acute issues. Western medicine, traditional medicine is phenomenally important. It's a miracle if you have an infection, or if you're in a car accident, or if you have something acute. It can stabilize you, get you better, save your life. But now we're talking about something that's chronic. It's lasted over 6 weeks. Your doctor has ruled out anything serious like cancer, bone disease. So once we get into that space, and then he started with back pain, he's like, what else could be going on? And after time and studying a new method, what he discovered was the brain, similar to other defense mechanisms that we know exist, is now also doing a defense mechanism against repressed, unconscious, threatening emotions that are threatening to come to the conscious, to the surface. And to block that, to distract you, it's creating these pain and disorder syndromes in the body. And a lot of people think that's impossible. There's no way that's possible. I've seen the images. I've been told. And a lot of it started there. And that's why usually most of us have to kind of try everything else. And then we're so desperate, we jump on a call like this and go, what is going on? And so for those people like myself, my colleagues on the panel, it was such a miracle. It's almost like thinking, I just learned that the world is round where 99% of the people still think it's flat. How are we going to get everyone to believe that the world is round? And that's going to solve a lot of issues. And it's not easy. As you guys know, it's very hard to believe when you've been conditioned one way. So our goal of these calls is to spread awareness and help you convince yourself that the brain is behind these disorders, and to turn you from a victim of your body to a victor of your body, to where you are now control of your health destiny. That's what it's about. So since Dr. Sarno discovered this, a lot of the science and physicians that were either trained by him or understand where he was coming from has started to look at the science, like, how is that even possible? How does the brain institute these type of disorders as a defense? How can we explain this scientifically? And that's what we're going to talk about tonight, because, and this will be the last thing before I kick it over to people that are much smarter and more important than I am on this call, that we're starting to hear, and it's good and bad news, a lot of more practitioners and patients come into this space, and it's exciting. And the message is starting to evolve and wobble. And people can hear different things, and they'll ask me, Joe, I'm hearing different things. What do I stick to? And if there's some confusion around the issue, it can actually block your progress. So I talked to Jim, I talked to Rebecca, and I talked to some other people, and I said, what is the common denominator? Let's have our next topic be, what is the common denominator of all the messaging that the people can feel good about and recover with confidence? And it's this. It's getting you to feel safe again. Getting you to understand there's actually nothing wrong with you that you cannot overcome. You're not physically defective or broken as you've been told. If this is the right therapy for you, again, you have to have your doctor rule out other more serious conditions. If your symptoms worsen or there's new symptoms that come along, absolutely, this doesn't substitute for the proper medical evaluations. That's not what we're here for. But what we are here is to turn you on to something different if nothing else seems to work, and to explore this. So as I said, what we're here to do is say, you're safe, you're okay. As you can see from the cameras and the amount of people on the call, there's thousands, millions of people suffering with this stuff. And this is a potential answer. We want to talk about the common denominator and some of the science that can make you confident that you're on the right path. So without further ado, Jim, I'm going to hand it over to you. You're going to do your presentation. Rebecca, you're going to build off of that. In between, we'll take questions either through the chat or live. And then at the end, we'll have another conversation amongst all of us to help each other out on this journey. So without further ado, Jim, if you don't mind sharing your screen and kicking it off.
All right. Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it. If anybody doesn't know me, you guys probably do from here. I'm Jim Prusak, physical therapist, pain PT. And what Joe said we're going to talk about today. I'm going to share my screen. So let me just do that and make sure that we can have that first before we go any further. Hang on a second here. And Joe, you can let me know, or anybody else, Rebecca, if this comes through. Make sure technology is working here today.
Looking good, buddy.
It's great.
Looking good. All right.
Actually, is that a picture of my brain?
That's what Joe's brain looks like every day.
Yeah, I think you got my MRI.
He's a really smart guy. As you can tell, he's lit up all the time. So what we're going to talk about, Joe and I talked about this, and Rebecca, about the common denominator in different methods of mind-body healing. And the reason why we wanted to bring this up was because, you know, there's a lot of different things that we can do and you hear about and maybe you practice to try to heal from chronic pain or chronic conditions. And there's a lot of overlap, right, to what we're doing. And I wanted to go through here today and show you actually what happens in the brain with a couple different of these approaches. So we're just going to start by just looking at all these different methods that are out there. And there's many more than what I put down here of different mind-body healing. And we're going to start at the top of Dr. Sarno, because that's what this is about. Knowledge therapy. One of the things Dr. Sarno talked about, the first thing was getting an understanding and knowledge that you're safe, that you're okay, you're not damaged physically, and that this is a problem in the brain and the psychology, not in the physicality of your body. So some of these methods of healing, like getting knowledge through Dr. Sarno's books, through other authors like Dr. Hanscom, Dr. Schubiner, Dr. Schechter, watching videos. And as you go down the list, you'll see all these things that people do to try to heal. We try to think psychological instead of physical. We talk to your brain, which is called self-talk. That's one of Dr. Sarno's 3 do's, talking to your brain, tell that you won't take it anymore. People have tried journaling, journaling your stresses and emotions. We've got journal speak, Nicole Sachs, expressive writing. So we have, seeing a TMS doctor to get a confirmation of the diagnosis, working with mind-body coaches, psychologists. There's things like visualization, positive affirmations, somatic tracking, somatic experiencing, meditation. You should meditate, mindfulness, MBSR, which is mindfulness-based stress reduction. which was started by John Kabat-Zinn. Joe Dispenza, you hear his name being thrown out there as well. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, emotional awareness and expression therapy, that was started by Dr. Schubiner and Mark Lumley. Acceptance and commitment therapy called ACT. ISTDP, intensive short-term dynamic psychotherapy, internal family systems, IFS. There's things like EFT tapping, EMDR, energy psychology techniques, voodoo, faith healing, placebo. I mean, everything out there, there's a lot out there, right? Just looking at this list may make a lot of you guys feel overwhelmed, right? Do I need to do everything on this list to get better? The answer is probably no. You might need to do something on this list to get better. And if you look at this list, you can take one person or more than one person that has done each of these things and gotten better, right? Somebody might say, yeah, I did meditation, mindfulness, and it made me better. I read Dr. Sarno's books and I was better. I started talking to my brain and telling myself I was okay, and I started feeling better. I journaled to my stresses and emotions, I started feeling better, blah, 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 blah. Everything here has helped some people, right? Some of these things in combination and some of these things alone. And I'm going to talk to you now about what the commonality is amongst all these things. Okay, Dr. Sarno had some of the purest sort of understanding of this and how we approach it. And that's why we use Dr. Sarno as sort of our model here. But let's go through what happens here and what's the common denominator here. Okay, you got all these spokes on the wheel, but where is it all going? Where is it leading to? Well, even Homer Simpson knows what's up. He says, no brain, no pain. So if you don't have a brain, you can't have pain. It's impossible, even acute pain. So what we're talking about is your brain. Your brain is where you register pain, not only from an acute injury. The brain also can create and cause pain, which we see a lot in chronic pain. Now, an amputee is a perfect example of that. How can an amputee have pain in a part of a limb that doesn't exist anymore? How is that possible? Well, it has to come from the brain, right? There's no way the person can feel pain in a foot that doesn't exist anymore. Now, they've done studies in amputees where they've had the person wiggle their toes that don't exist anymore. There's no toes, but they can actually wiggle them in their mind. And what it does in a functional MRI thing is it lights up the part of the brain that wiggles the toes. How crazy is that? So it tells us that that's originating in the brain, not in the periphery, not in the feet, not in the ankles. It actually is coming from the brain. Now, the reason why this happens is because we have a map of the body in the brain. Inside the brain, we have a map of the entire body. And in certain areas with an amputee, what happens is the area gets sort of lit up, okay, because it finds out there's something that's not right there. Hey, that foot is not there anymore, but it doesn't know. So somehow it explodes in danger and it lights up that part of the brain. And the person ends up with what's called phantom pain, phantom limb pain. It's a very common and very real thing. Now, the same thing can happen with chronic pain. This is a study that showed what's called smudging of the body part in the brain. So for example, somebody with low back pain here can have a smudging in the part of the cortex of the brain there that's related to that part of your body. So the only way you know your back is there is because your brain has a map in it that registers that you're paying attention to your back. Okay, so a lot of times with chronic pain, what happens is if we've had pain for a long time, the part of the brain that's associated with that body part or symptom, it gets changed. It has these smudges in it. And our sort of connection to that part of their body becomes altered. Okay, we're going to talk about the danger signals that we interpret signals as being dangerous versus being safe. Now, this is one of the changes that happens. Now, we're going to talk about two areas of the brain here and that are related very closely with chronic pain and with a lot of the different treatments you saw. This is the cortex and the limbic brain. And I'm going to try to keep this fairly simple because it can be really complex. There's so many areas of the brain, but we're going to make it a little bit basic. There's what we call the cortex and neocortex. And this is the part of your brain that does thinking, that has rationalization, interpretation, perception, thoughts, how we think about something. It sends orders, it has executive control, it interprets what's happening in the body and the other parts of the brain. Okay, that's called the cortex. That's the frontal part of your brain, in the front of your brain. The second part is called the limbic brain. You may have heard of that. This is more to do with your emotions, your emotional brain. Now, it includes a bunch of different areas, but this emotional brain is the part of the brain, as well as with the cortex, that's been linked mostly with chronic pain. And I'm going to go over it right now in the next thing here. Hang on a second. I don't know why I'm not able to change my slide. Here we go. How it all works in the brain. So don't get overwhelmed by this little chart here. I find this pretty interesting because this really sums up pretty much everything in the brain with chronic conditions. This was actually put together in a study in 2013, and it was talked about predicting the transition from acute to chronic pain. And they were looking at people with low back pain. And what they found was that people had pre-existing changes in their brains that predisposed and predicted them to have chronic pain a year later. So they did functional MRIs at the beginning of the study when somebody had an acute back pain episode. They did it again 1 year later. And certainly people still had pain after a year. People would develop chronic pain. Those people, when they looked at the brain scans from the beginning of the study, they could predict with greater than 80% accuracy who was going to get chronic pain. It had to do with the connections between this cortex, your frontal brain, with the limbic brain, the emotional brain, that there was an altered sort of signaling between these two parts of your brain. Now, if you look here, and I'm going to go over now what happens when we actually heal from pain or when we get better, right? Like I gave you that list of different things out there that we can do, mind body healing. And it has to do mainly with these two parts of your brain. And there's some changes going on in there that can then create a change in your body or a change in your pain. Okay, so if you look at the bottom of the screen, starting first, is what's called nociception. The way at the bottom, nociception, what that is a signal from your body to your brain to indicate something might not be right or something might be dangerous or something might be wrong. Now it's up to your brain to interpret that, to make a decision on whether this is painful, whether there's a problem, whether there's danger or something's happening. So it's the brain that makes the final determination. So people talk about nociception coming from a body part as being pain, but it's not actually pain. Pain is actually registered in the brain. So if you look up at the top left, there's what's called the cortex there. Okay, we talked about that as being the frontal part of your brain, the thinking brain. Okay, and there's an area called the medial prefrontal cortex, MPFC. Okay, this is the part of the brain, as well as the LPFC, the lateral prefrontal cortex, that's been linked in with chronic pain in relationship to the limbic brain. Now, what is this? Now, how do we use this part of our brain in conjunction with what's called the ACC and insula, which is your perception, to heal? What would this be? If we're changing the cortex, which is interpreting what's going on as either dangerous or safe, and we're sending a message to our emotional brain and into our body, this would be things like, hey, I just read a book by Dr. Sarno, and he said that I don't have something wrong with me, that this is just unconscious emotions. Wow, okay. Your cortex says, wow, I believe that, and I think I'm okay. So now it sends a message to the other parts of the brain. It sends a strong message, probably, and it causes a downregulation of the emotional brain, which is we're going to talk about in a second. And it sends what's called descending inhibition into the body, down the spinal tracts, through the spinal cord into the body. Okay, that's one way your cortex can elicit healing. Okay, talking to your brain. Dr. Sarno says, talk to your brain, tell it you won't take it anymore, tell it you're safe, tell it you're okay, you're fine, there's nothing wrong. That's another way this cortex can send a message from the frontal part of your brain to the other parts of your brain that might be overreacting and then down into your body. Okay. It also perceives, the cortex is a perception. It perceives, again, I said it's something that interprets, it perceives, it makes a judgment on what's happening. So, how are you perceiving your pain? How are you perceiving your symptoms? How are you perceiving these emotions? Are they bad? Are they dangerous? Or are they okay? Am I safe? Is there not a problem with these? Your perception is a signal back to your brain. Your perception in every moment is a signal back to your brain whether you think this is okay or not okay. So your cortex is constantly sending signals to your limbic brain and into your body to let you know whether something's all right or it's not. So this is how the cortex works in terms of being able to downregulate pain. Okay, so anything that we've learned, any messages that we're sending, if we're changing beliefs in the brain, cognitive behavioral therapy, we're doing things around our thoughts, around our perceptions, around how we see what's happening. When we can make those changes in the brain and we can send a strong enough signal, we can actually cause a change in our pain. We also know, which is quite interesting now from the science, that certain people have a greater ability to do this easily. And this may explain why some people can read a book and get better fast, while other people need to work at this longer repetition. We know there's certain people that are highly suggestible that also have a greater placebo response than other people. These are people that can actually elicit this sort of cortex response on a higher level, meaning a stronger signal. Okay, for some reason, there's a genetic predisposition, or they have a greater openness or suggestibility, and so they have a greater signal that's being elicited down into the other parts of the brain and into the body. Other people, maybe it's not as easy for them to accept, believe, be open to, be suggestible. And so they're going to have to work a little harder to get that signal going so that it can cause the downregulation of pain. So that's why people read the book, and some people say, I read the book and man, I was better the next day, or I was better a couple of weeks later. They were able to get, you could call it a placebo response, but a placebo is a real response in your brain. They were able to get that response in a very strong way to cause what's called descending inhibition. Okay, let's move to this other part of your brain. So that was the cortex. This part down here is called the limbic brain. This is a very important part of the brain when it comes to chronic pain, chronic health ailments that don't go away. We've got three areas here, and there's more, but there's three main areas. One here is the NAC. You'll see that it's called the nucleus accumbens. It's been shown in many, many studies now to be related to chronic pain and also into addiction. So there's some talk now that chronic pain has parallels to addiction. And this part of the brain is the motivational aspect of the brain, to be motivated, to send signals to take action. And also, because it plays a role in addiction, it's an area of dopamine and serotonin, which are two neurotransmitters in the brain that give us pleasure and make us feel happy and make us feel good. And we know with chronic pain in some people, there's a deficit there, that this part of your brain, the NAC, is smaller. It's actually literally smaller in size, it's shrunk. And so we're maybe not getting the natural dopamine response or serotonin response that is a normal reaction to pain that can cause a downregulation. So how does this work with treatment? Well, let's say somebody who says, you know what, I'm going to go out and have some enjoyment in my life. I'm going to do things that make me feel good. I'm going to see friends. I'm going to go out and have a good time. I'm not going to focus on the pain. I'm going to go do a hobby. I'm going to do things that make me feel good. Okay, that's going to increase dopamine in your brain. It's going to increase serotonin in your brain. That can cause you to feel better. Okay, so some people just say, you know what, I forgot about the pain and I just got back to life. I just got back to living my life again and doing things I enjoy, fun things. Okay. That's one way that this could, another way that this could cause your pain to go down in the limbic brain. Two other areas. The bottom one is the big one, the amygdala. The amygdala you probably heard of before, fight or flight center of the brain, the emotional center of the brain, area of fear, anger, all the emotions, sadness. This part of the brain has been shown to be, again, overactive in people with chronic pain. It's also implicated very highly in anxiety and depression, that this part of the brain is overactivated. Some people have a resting state in their amygdala that's actually, sort of, I won't say the word abnormal, but it's at a higher level, meaning they're stressed. They're anxious people. They're anxious a lot. Maybe they're more depressed. They tend to have anger, and maybe they don't know it because they're repressing it or suppressing it, or they're very outwardly angry people. They're in a lot of fear, a lot of worry. They tend to catastrophize. This means your amygdala is overactive. Okay, and when it's overactive, it's going to give you a good chance it can give you pain. So how do we work with this in treatment? Well, a lot of ways. Anything working with your emotions. So people journal, they do expressive writing. People they express their emotions through working with the psychologist, through a mind-body coach. They learn to do somatic work, which dealing somatic experiencing, somatic tracking with their emotions. They learn to calm their emotional system. All these ways can cause your amygdala to shift. They learn to lower their anxiety. Okay, this can also cause your pain to go down. Okay, and the last area here is called the hippo. It's not a hippo as if an hippopotamus, it's called the hippocampus. And this is the part of your brain, the limbic system, that deals with memory. Okay, so memories are real in the brain. They're in the past, but they live in your brain. So let's say you pull up a memory, and I've done this with many clients, and all of a sudden people think about something that was upsetting, or a person, place, or thing, and they get an emotional reaction, or they get a symptom that starts. Okay, because this memory is attached to, you can see those arrows there, it's attached to your amygdala, which is attached to your NAC, which could be either eliciting some dopamine or not. It also works with sort of like anxiety and depression. It could actually be not releasing anything, so you're going to feel worse. And then that goes to your cortex over here. And your cortex is perceiving what's happening maybe as in a negative light. Hey, this is terrible. This is something bad that happened to me. It could be a trauma. It could be a person you don't like. It could be a place you don't like, your work. So a memory can be linked to pain. Okay, a memory. So some work that people do, EMDR, EFT tapping, journaling, working with a psychologist, mind-body coach, many ways that we can work with memories. We can work with the past, right? Dr. Sarno says, write down your list of traumas in the past, childhood, current stressors. A lot of these things are not happening now, but they happened somewhere in the past. They're memories. So we can work on that part of our brain to elicit change when we change our memories and the reactions they have in the brain. So these are some ways that we can use, or understand, I should say, how the brain works for healing with different things. Okay, this cortex and this limbic brain. There's a lot more complexity to it, but I try to keep it a little bit simple here so people can understand it. Now, let's get back to danger versus safety, right? This is what it's about. It's about danger versus safety. We kind of zoomed in. Now we're going to zoom back out again here around what we're talking about in life. And if the brain's interpreting something as dangerous, even if it's not, it's going to set off all those parts of the brain I just mentioned to you. It's going to elevate emotion, be fear. It's going to trigger your perception as being negative. Something's wrong. This is bad. It's going to cause danger, which causes a danger signal to be elicited from the prefrontal cortex to basically either amplify or light up the parts of your brain and body with more pain. So this danger versus safety in the brain. So really what this is if you look on the left-hand side here of the screen, the first part here, and it says, is this dangerous? What's happening? Let's take pain, for example, or your symptom. Is your pain or your symptom dangerous? If there's a perception in your brain that, yes, this is, what is it going to do? It's going to amplify the signal from the brain to the other, from the cortex to the other parts of the brain, to that limbic emotional brain, and then down into your spinal cord and over to the parts of your body that facilitates more pain or more symptoms. This is how it works. We know also with chronic pain that this sort of loop here, it's already pre-existing for some people, meaning that it's already there in place. Okay, so it's not like they developed it after the pain, it was already there prior to the pain. Now, on the right-hand side, again, let's take it again, your pain, your symptom, is this dangerous? Your perception from your cortex says, no, it's not. This is not dangerous because XYZ, I've been checked out by a doctor. I've seen a TMS practitioner. My history speaks of TMS. This has gone on past the normal healing time. There's many of the things you can look at that can add up to a TMS diagnosis where you can say, no, this is not dangerous. Okay, what does that do in your brain? It says an inhibitory signal from your cortex to your amygdala, your limbic brain, says, hey guys, cool the jets, it's fine. Calm down, it's not dangerous anymore. That's called descending inhibition. That is lost in people with chronic pain, shown to be lost. That network usually works normally and naturally with acute pain to gradually downregulate the pain so it doesn't become chronic. But in people with chronic pain, that pathway is not always working very well, either because of the cortex or because of the limbic system. And so we need to cultivate this. This is part of the work of talking to your brain, learning, getting knowledge that, hey, I'm not really danger. I'm not in a lot of danger. I'm safe. There isn't anything wrong. Expressing my emotions. My emotions aren't dangerous. I can express them. Things like this, that we can get this descending inhibition going from your brain into your body. I'm going to finish up here in a minute and pass it on to Rebecca, but I just want to go through last slide here. This is actually a little interesting slide. It's kind of cool. When I worked in Australia and I studied with these guys, David Butler and Lorimer Mosley, you may have heard of. They put out a book. They talk also a lot about danger and safety messages. And so they call these DIMS, danger in the mind, and SIMS, safety in the mind. And so basically any of these 7 things here can either be perceived as danger messages or safety messages that are going from your brain into your body. It's things that you hear, things that you see, smell, taste, touch can either be considered danger or safety messages. Things that you do, activities that you do, things that you say, words that you use, negative words. Oh, I got this degenerative disc disease at L3, L4, where you say, that's going to be a danger message potentially. Things that you think and believe. What do you believe about your pain? What do you believe about your health condition? That's either going to be a danger message or possibly a safety message. Places you go can trigger people unconsciously. Somewhere you go where maybe there was an association with something bad that happened, that could be a danger message. You go to a place that makes you feel good, you feel safe, that's a safety message. People in your life can either be danger messages or safety messages. And then finally, things happening in your body. And this is typically pain, things that we feel, emotions. Do we see those things as being safe, or are those danger messages coming, or do they elicit danger messages from the brain? Okay, if you have questions, guys, put them in the chat box. I don't want to go on longer because I know Rebecca's going to share, and then we can kind of talk more at the end. So I'll pass it back over to Joe.
Thanks, Bud. No, yeah, thanks a lot. I really like that presentation because it both demonstrates the complexity of the brain and why even I, after many years of being back pain free and Crohn's free, I still do things that work on my emotional health because the brain is complex and there's a lot left over. So I continue to clean things out. And as we've discussed before also, that if you do the simple things right, a lot of that stuff just takes care of itself. And so this webinar, our programs are designed really to start you with overcoming physical symptom first, understanding that your brain has more complexity and power to it, and then you become the driver of your emotional and psychological health going forward. You're more capable dealing with your physical stuff, but also your emotional health and things like that, because that's a lifelong journey. So yeah, so I appreciate that, Jim. Again, we definitely are going to take questions. I do want to go into you, Rebecca. We're going to build on that. And then at the end, even if we have to go over a few minutes and people want to stay around, you can chat or ask live questions. We'll get them answered on the call, or even we'll follow up after the call as well. So thanks for everyone for hanging in there a little bit more. Rebecca, thank you so much. I look forward to your presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And thank you, Jim, for doing all the heavy science lifting, getting all that brain science out there, which really just pivots into what I'm going to talk about. So is anybody feeling more stress lately? Do you notice more anxiety, maybe more body pain or sleep disturbance? Right? It's in the air. I wrote a blog recently. I was in a nature preserve that looked really pristine, and I ran into these high tension power lines, and they were crackling and buzzing. And I was thinking about that's how our mind body system can be when we have too much stress running through our nervous system. Now, as Jim just explained, it's the interpretation of stress, and it's what we do with that. That can help bring down the danger signal in our brain and also subside the symptoms as well. So I'm going to share some practical things with you. I'm going to share my screen. Yep, the night of the election, there was an explosion of pain. I can relate to that. Definitely anxiety as well. So we are going to look at calming the brain and the body. I want to start with some thoughts by Dr. Howard Schubiner. And this really ties into what Jim was saying. Pain is fueled by fear of pain. So we know pain is fueled by unconscious emotions that are repressed, but it's also fueled by our fear. The danger signal in the subconscious brain controls whether pain is turned on or off. When we've had stressful events in childhood particularly, or later traumas, that sensitizes this danger signal, so it's more likely to be activated by a later stressor, such as the election. If you were yelled at by a parent, later in life, if you're yelled at by a boss or somebody else, your body can actually generate pain just simply because it's trying to warn you that there's a danger. So the brain reacts to threats with pain, and we know this because we touch a hot stove and we get pain in our hand and we lift it up. But it also reacts with fatigue, depression, anxiety, insomnia, headaches, irritable bladder and bowel. These are all reactions to a perceived threat by the brain, which may not actually be a physical threat. In fact, a threat obviously is a physical injury, but it can also be fear of losing a job or a relationship. It can be guilt, shame, grief, anger, particularly if we learn that feeling emotions isn't safe as a child, that can actually be perceived as a threat by the brain. So it will create those physical symptoms to distract us. The point I want to make is the brain is encoded to interpret physical injury and emotional stress as similar threats. So any perceived threat can trigger a pain response in the brain. This is a great graphic by Dr. Howard Schubiner, and it just shows that the sensitization, which is the trauma and early adverse experiences, along with daily stresses and injury, all has these orange arrows pointing into the danger signal. That's activating the limbic system. And what does that do? Well, it creates symptoms because your brain is actually trying to warn you there's something wrong. Pain, anxiety, depression, fatigue. But what happens is when we focus on them, we fear them, then that loops back into the danger signal and creates more symptoms. So we get stuck in that loop. So here are 6 ways to calm your nervous system and create a sense of safety. It's not about getting rid of symptoms. If you're on this call, I know you probably want to get rid of symptoms. We all do, and we all can. But it's really about changing our relationship to fear, particularly lowering fear. So number 1 is reinforce that nothing is wrong with you. So if you've ruled out a serious cause like a blood disorder or cancer, just own that this is TMS. This is a mind-body issue 100%, because we know the placebo effect often works as well as the medicine. You have nothing to lose to go all in. Be confident you'll recover, but don't worry about when. So I really found in my own healing from chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia that having this timeline was really stressful. It activated the nervous system and kept generating symptoms. We want to let go of the timeline and instead really retrain our brain with thoughts that soothe you. The way we say these thoughts or affirmations are just as important as what they are. So think about if, a parent or an authority figure is speaking to you angrily, it might be stressful, but if they're speaking to you calmly and assertively, you're going to listen, right? You have respect. So we really want to instill calmness and confidence with these mantras. Now, I find for myself and clients, it's really helpful to find the language that works for you. For me, at first, I could only believe I am not sick. I couldn't believe I was healthy. But when I learned this knowledge from Dr. Sarno, I really got, oh, I'm not sick. My brain's creating these symptoms. Other possibilities are really using this language. I am okay. I am safe. I am resilient. This will pass. If symptoms come up, fears come up, reminding yourself, my brain is creating this symptom. It's no big deal. It can't take my peace of mind. Another one I like is hurt does not equal harm. I think that actually comes from Moseley in Australia. So remind yourself every time symptoms arise, every time you ruminate on something physical. Sometimes people say, oh, I've said these mantras, but it's really retraining yourself on a daily basis. Number 2 is avoid catastrophizing and the 3 Ps. So when I used to have insomnia, I would just lay there catastrophizing about how completely comatose I would be the next day and not be able to function. And what that does is it creates more vigilance, right? So it creates more symptoms. So that's catastrophizing. We want to really stay with what we know in this moment. Now, if I can't sleep well, I lay there. I just feel the sensations in my body, feel the comfort of the warm bed, just notice the moment, but not trying to project the worst case scenario onto the future. I also like to say avoid the 3 Ps of pressure, pushing, and perfectionism. So these are all things that create undue stress, whether we're saying, I need to heal, or, I need him to do this thing, or you're forcing yourself to reach some artificial goal or timeline. Of course, we know perfectionism is very common with mind-body stuff, this drive to reach just almost impossible standards. So when you notice these coming up, you can ask yourself, would you want somebody who you care about to be abused in this way? Because really, in a sense, it is your brain doing this to yourself. It's not your fault. You're not trying to, but you can learn to catch these thoughts. And then in turn, you can ask, do you care that your brain is causing this extra suffering? And say to yourself, I don't deserve this. I don't deserve to suffer more. I already have these physical symptoms, and just see what you can let go. Find your own language. I like to say it's okay to be average right now. In fact, it's great for my nervous system. It's healing for my nervous system to be average. Number 3, don't fixate on your symptoms. So the natural reaction to pain is to pay close attention, to stop, and to rest. And this works really well for injuries, but it's really counterproductive with mind-body syndrome. We want to try to avoid what Dr. Schubiner calls his 5 F's, which is fear, focus, fighting, frustration, or fixing. We don't want to fix, fight, or fear the symptom, because again, that actually creates more symptoms. So I like to think of it as if somebody in your life were constantly asking you, did you eat too much, or did you eat the wrong thing, or didn't you move the wrong way? Didn't you overdo it? It kind of seems like you have a bad back. How would you feel, right? It would probably freak you out a bit. This is actually what it does to our amygdala when we're constantly obsessing on these sensations, which really are just part of being in a human body. I really like this idea that success is no longer measured by how much we feel our symptoms, but by how little we allow them to affect us. Okay, I'm speeding along here, guys. Number 4 is take back your life. Really live the life that you want to live, regardless of the symptoms. So we want to say to be outcome independent, that we really want to pursue our chosen activities, even in the presence of symptoms. When we completely avoid certain activities because we think either sitting makes it hurt, or standing makes it hurt, or walking, it actually reinforces the neural pathways that those things are unsafe. So considering that you have ruled out anything more structural, such as an actual broken bone, challenge your triggers so they don't keep you in that fear spiral. For most people, it really works to move slowly but steadily, regardless of your symptoms. And as the fear comes up, because fear will rise when you're challenging your triggers and the things that your brain thinks is dangerous, stand up to that fear. You are stronger than the fear. You can do this. You can retrain your brain. So I think of these symptoms arising like when a car alarm goes off just because a woman in a baby stroller walked by. So now you have honking through the whole neighborhood. There's no danger whatsoever. It just sounds like there is. So you want to keep walking in that case. So number 5 is when you notice tension, fear, or emotions, connect to your body. So sometimes we don't want to connect to our body because we've had a lot of pain. But it can be very healing, and these are simple things that you can do that's very soothing and not particularly challenging. So, it's not challenging to the pain in this case because we're not going right into that sensation. So one way is just to notice your feet and or your hands. Notice the sensations. Maybe you can feel your hands in your lap right now. Notice the warmth, the temperature. You could feel your feet on the floor and really bring some of your mind down into your feet. These are things you can do on a regular basis, even as you're in this meeting. Another thing that's helpful from somatic experiencing is orienting to the environment, just sort of looking around, because as mammals, we like to know what's in our surrounding while you're actually feeling the back of your body on the surface that's holding you. So you're connected to the environment, you're feeling the back of your legs and your back on the chair, your feet on the floor, and just noticing if that brings a grounding effect. Another way to connect to the body is just tuning into the breath, feeling what it feels like to breathe on the inside, just noticing the innate rhythm of your breath. And if you're feeling really activated, I love this regulating breath. So this is where you would see how long you would typically inhale. So I think I typically inhale about 6 counts, and then you would extend the exhales twice as long. So you may not quite get to 12 counts, but you just want to exhale longer than the inhale. You want to do this in and out your nose if you can, and just inhaling into the lower belly and then extending the exhale. This can't help but calm your nervous system because it activates the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system when we exhale. I do this sometime for 5 or 10 minutes. If you can't get to sleep, you can do this for 20 minutes. It's a really calming practice and a way to establish a connection back with your body. The sixth one is to play more. So this ties into what both Joe and Jim were saying. So Dr. Sarno wrote about enjoyable activities having this counterbalancing effect on the internal pressures in the unconscious mind. And Howard Schubiner actually wrote that a lack of joy and peace reinforces chronic pain and other symptoms. I thought that was striking, that a lack of joy and peace can reinforce chronic symptoms. So since we mind-body types tend to be very diligent, very responsible, I really have found that pleasure can be the best medicine because your nervous system will regulate itself and your body knows how to heal. Your body knows how to find homeostasis, particularly when your nervous system is regulated. So make enjoyment your prescription. I'm giving you the prescription here. Find something you enjoy that engages you on a regular basis. So we know physical activity is a good stress release. It can be some kind of exercise, but it could also be a hobby, art, reading, cooking, time in nature or with loved ones. I really recommend, and this changed my life, is scheduling in playtime, or pleasure time for yourself on your calendar. A little bit every day, if you can, several longer windows each week. And notice how you feel in your body when you're doing something enjoyable, because you'll start to feel safe and comfortable in your body. And that's what we want to do, is create these set signals of comfort and safety. So in closing, these are just 6 ways to create a sense of safety and feel your best. I'm going to post a blog on this on my website, as well as I have a somatic meditation, which is also very calming if you want to sign up for the newsletter. So just to recap, know that nothing is wrong with you. I know it hurts. The symptoms are real. You're not making it up, but it's not actually hurting or damaging you. It's just coming from your brain. So we want to avoid catastrophizing, and the 3 Ps. We don't want to fixate on our symptoms, take charge of our life, connect to our body, and play more. So with that, I am going to come back here to the group and see if we want to take any comments or questions at this point. Joe, I think that you were going to open it up to people if they want to actually verbally ask something that they can unmute themselves.
Yeah. So we have one now, which we'll address. And as we talk about it, you can absolutely chat in. We are at the hour mark, so this is bonus time. So feel free to stay around. We'll answer your questions. So go ahead and chat them in, or even better, if you'd like to ask a question, unmute yourself. So let me address the first one. And then after that, if anyone wants to unmute and ask a question or chat one in, feel free. So we did have someone talk about asking did Western medical systems create more danger, or what they call nocebos. A placebo is something that you do, and because you believe it's going to help you, it does. A nocebo is actually the opposite. It's sometimes called the medical hex, where a doctor will say, you know what, your back is just damaged beyond repair. You're probably going to have pain for the rest of your life. So not only does he not give you a positive message, he actually gives you a nocebo. And sure enough, your brain latches onto that. And instead of potentially dealing with these emotions and recognizing those, you're going to just feel your pain for years and years, even though you just did something relatively nothing to your back, really. So yes, absolutely. The Western medicine can not only miss the mark and actually make things worse. So that's what we're trying to correct in those instances where Western medicine has tried to help, but actually has hurt. And so that's what we're trying to erase. That's what we're trying to turn around. That's why we're trying to say the world is round and not flat, even though out of the best intentions, a lot of times doctors will tell you the world is flat. You cannot go sail over there, or you're going to fall off the edge of the earth, you know? So, yeah, does anyone want to, let's see, I got two messages down here.
You know what, Joe, do you mind if I just bring
Absolutely.
up a slide on imaging? Because I'm in a class right now with Dr. Howard Schubiner. And this is just so telling as to what the question was talking about with imaging, because you look at disc degeneration. So by age 50, 80% of people have that. You know, by age 50, 60% of people have disc bulges. These are what are called normal abnormalities. But these are people that are asymptomatic. So even though they have these quote unquote abnormalities, they don't have any symptoms. So I just wanted to show this because imaging really can scare people. But just because you have a quote unquote abnormal image doesn't mean that's what's causing the pain. So I really agree with the question that that's a real risk of allopathic medicine.
Yeah, and I think this is why Dr. Sarno started with back pain, because not only did he see this, he also looked back and he said, there's nothing that's actually positively established that the spine is causing the pain. That was just an assumption. And then that theory just took off. And when he started looking at it, he said, you know, the symptomology, they'll go in and say, oh, you have this L4, L5, disc degeneration, whatnot. And he's like, well, the symptoms never match up. It's impossible most of the time. And so he's like looking at different things and he's like, we're just dead wrong. But that became part of medical dogma and a multi-billion-dollar industry built up around it. And it was never grounded in science. You know, I've been in healthcare 20 years. I've gone to probably hundreds of medical lectures, and they all have major flaws and inconsistencies and blind spots. And it's because of this. They don't know about this. And this explains it all. But they'll just say, oh, you know, they'll explain away the inconsistencies, but the runaway train is, you know, the horse has been out of the barn. So again, medicine is very good at certain things, but certain things it's just missed the mark. And this is just a grassroots effort to help people as individuals and then hopefully expand this out to as many people as possible.
Yeah, one last thing I'll say too is that those nocebos are, you know, told by doctors that the diagnosis words themselves are nocebos. So if you latch on to that diagnosis word, that creates a change in your brain immediately, and usually not for the better. Just like with a placebo, we know that people can associate a certain thing with feeling better, and they don't even have to take it and they can feel better. So it works both ways. We're trying to cultivate a placebo, not because we're trying to trick you, but because it's real, because this is really happening in your brain and not in your body.
I really appreciate one of the comments here that guilt, shame, grief, and repressed anger are my superpowers. Absolutely. You know, as we learn to accept these, to feel these, to find ways Jim talked about through expressive writing. I also talked about some feeling somatic sensations in the body. This is a life force energy that we can harness. It truly is a superpower. So thank you for saying that. There's another great question here about watching the news and listening to people's stories about COVID. Should I tell myself something in particular during these times, or should I try to avoid listening to the news and stories about health problems? Yeah, this is so up for a lot of people now. And it's really individual. I've found that I really can't watch much cable news right now, but I can get what I need from the New York Times. And that's much less stressful to my nervous system. So I'm doing more of that, but I do think limiting it is important. I know we need to be informed, but you want to sort of sense how you're feeling in your body. You can even feel into the back of the body or feel your feet or feel your breath as you're listening. And when you notice you're just really getting in your mind, you're getting anxious, you're getting disconnected, that may be a time to take a break from the news.
Yeah, and I agree with that, Rebecca. It's your tolerance. So, in a sense, if you're open to it, you can start to increase your tolerance to it because it's not really dangerous in and of itself, the news at the time. So you can train your brain that way too to say, okay, let me sit here for another minute and see if I can just handle this reaction in my body. I feel some anxiety. I feel something happening. And you can almost use it as a retraining, but to a certain extent, if you get overloaded, like Rebecca says, turn it off, take a break, but see if you can, I used to, when I was younger, one of the things I had was heavy anxiety, and I could not listen to people argue. My parents argued so much that if I heard somebody on the TV arguing, I'd turn it off right away. And finally, after a while, I started going, you know what, this is ridiculous. So I just started playing with it. And after a while, I would still feel that reaction, but I knew it wasn't dangerous. So then I trained myself to sit with it a little more. And that actually was a way of healing it, to be honest. So you can play with this a little bit in your comfort zone. Don't put yourself too far over the edge.
Yeah, and to add to that, when you are listening or watching to the news, she was asking kind of what do I tell myself? And you'll have to find your own messages. But I think coming into the moment and remembering that I am safe right here and now, no matter what I'm hearing on the news, it's not actually happening to me. And just coming back into the present moment, the breath, the body, observing any fears that come up.
Yeah, I think probably all of us on this call probably share a ability to catastrophize or have cognitive distortions of some sort. Whether or not that actually adds or subtracts to your physical symptoms, I think is independent as well. But yeah, so you take it in doses and then you learn a higher tolerance as you learn to be more healthy in your thinking. So yeah, it's just a process. And so everyone kind of, by learning all this, expands their knowledge base and finds their path,
I think
just like Linda said, like you said, sometimes you can run away from things to a point where you're like, well, that's kind of strange too. Like I need to open myself up to the world, but it works. I do a lot of work on my thinking process of this and that. My physical symptoms are long gone for the most part, but my thinking, my core negative beliefs, things of that nature, I still need to work on. And sometimes when I get my thoughts run away from me. So I think we all can get in that space. The news can trigger that. So it's like, okay, how much do I work with this and how much do I just allow myself to rest?
Yeah, and I appreciate that comma from Linda that if we're avoiding the stressors, that they have more power over you, which we know that that does actually create those neural pathways or strengthen those neural pathways saying this is dangerous. So that goes back to what Jim was saying when he's just being very present with the news or any other activity. It's like we're taking the power back.
Yeah, so I don't know, Jim, unless you want to add anything, I think we're good. I don't want anyone to feel guilty if they want to jump off. It looks like
a lot of questions at the end here on the chat.
Yeah.
Did you
Go
guys
ahead.
feel like I need to choose between accomplishing things and enjoying my life? How can we balance our desire to get things done with the quest for peace, calm, and joy?
Great question. I'm dealing with that today.
Yeah, why don't you speak to it, Joe?
Rebecca?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really all about staying connected to the body and the feeling state as much as you can, because you can do things quickly or efficiently in a mood or a way that's not stressed, or we can do things slowly in a way that is stressed. So for me, I really try to stick with noticing when tension's rising in my body. If tension's starting to appear in my body as I'm doing things, it's usually a sign for me to slow down. It's a sign often that I have those 3 Ps: pushing, pressure, and perfectionism, right? Because we can get things done. It's once we start trying to push ourselves, trying to just really reach unrealistic goals on a man-made timeline that we're causing excess stress. So when you start feeling that tension in your body, notice your thoughts, see if you can take a pause, feel into your body or your breath, and go back to the activity. Sometimes we realize we don't have to do all the kind of frantic things we were doing when we just take that little time out. Does that make sense, Debbie? Or do you want to say anything else? I think you can unmute yourself if you do.
Well, let me tell you what happened to me today, and then Debbie, absolutely chime in. I'm sitting at my computer. It's 9:30. I get an email out of the blue. Things with my to-do list is starting to pile up for my day job. And I get an email that basically says, hey, Joe, some of the managers are talking that you weren't prepared for a presentation you did. And those people that were talking have a direct line to our boss's boss. And it's totally inaccurate. They didn't understand. So all of a sudden my stress starts to rise. And I said, you know what? I don't like stress, but I don't like not accomplishing stuff and doing my job well, which sometimes I'd be running from stress. I would kind of skip out on certain things in my job. I said, you know what? I'm going to try to rebalance, like you said. I'm not going to stress, but I'm going to do the work to prepare and clean up this mess and things. So I had this kind of epiphany that I don't like stress, but I don't like not living up to my potential. And trying to rebalance that is always, it's a daily thing I think we all go through. So yeah, so it's a balance. I mean, there's a lot going on in life. You got one life and you want to fulfill your potential, but also enjoy it and not stress. So you just kind of work on yourself by coming on these calls and reading and balancing your life. And that's a day-to-day process. I meditate, I do all these different things, and I do cognitive behavioral therapy. And again, my physical symptoms are gone, but I continue on this path. So
Yeah, I'd say like what you guys both said speaks to trying to live in the moment. Because if you only have to deal with one moment, it's a lot easier than dealing with everything at once, your past and your future. It's way overwhelming to think about all that. So just take each moment as you can. Like Rebecca said, come back, deep breath. Okay, I'm going to take this one moment and just deal with this. And then the next moment. And that lends to your beautiful day sometimes, if you can do that.
Absolutely. And Joe, I don't know if you can send out the slides again. Someone was asking for those, and I'm certainly happy to provide mine as well.
Okay, that's a great way to wrap up. James, thank you so much. Yes, make sure you give credit for whatever you do instead of judging for what you don't get done. That's what I'll do. I'll say that was a good call tonight. Sounds like we got some good feedback. I'll consolidate the slides, our contact information. If you have more follow-up questions, you want to get a little bit more in-depth coaching or consultation, you can certainly schedule times with one of us for that to look more into your individual case. And so thank you very much, everybody. We will wrap up now. Look for your follow-up emails and see you in a couple weeks on the next call.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your great comments. It was so good to see and hear everyone.
Okay, guys. And by the way, you all get a recording of this call too. So, all right. Thanks, guys. Have a great night.
Take care.
Thanks, Linda. See you, Brant. Thanks.
Thanks all.